Omakase, the life and words of author M. Karen. If this is our first time meeting each other, let me give you a brief introduction. My name is Max. I write books for a living. Often I get asked, how do I maintain my youthful appearance? And the answer is always pretty darn boring. I exfoliate, I moisturize, I make sure to wear sunscreen when I go out, I make deals with the devil, I make sacrifices to the dark gods, the regular stuff you would find on any kind of makeup YouTube channel. It's a lot of work, but hey, it's worth it. My pronouns are they, them. And in case you're wondering, I am doing better. Last week on my update, I was talking about how I dealt with burnout, and I was forced to take some time off. I'm doing way better now. And welcome to the 12th episode of Omakase, my writing advice and inspiration podcast featuring my silliness. In the case that you are new to the podcast, the format goes a little bit like this. This podcast is broken into 3 segments. My week, where I talk about what I've been reading, what I've been doing, what I've been working on. Viewer questions, where I take questions from Twitter, Tumblr, YouTube, my email, and I feature them on the podcast. And the last segment is the prompt, some sort of creative exercise to get our creative gears turning, to think about stories and imagine what we would do with certain scenarios. Today, the podcast might be a little bit on the shorter side, mostly because I'm recording it really close to the previous one, so I won't have much to talk about when it comes to my week, but that's fine. Before we move over to the rest of the podcast, I want to give you 2 bits of housekeeping. The same ones that I always give you. The song you hear at the beginning and at the end of the show is titled "The Dream of Green" by the OC Jazz Collective and OCRemix.org. You can find out the link to this song in the description of this video/podcast. And if you enjoy this show and would like to support it, but Patreon is not your cup of tea, then how about a cup of coffee instead? You can treat me to a cup of coffee by following the link in the description of this video/podcast. And now, with all that preamble out of the way, let's dive right in with the first segment, my week. What have I been doing? What have I been up to? The answer is not much, because I'm recording this episode really close to the previous one. As you might have heard, last week I dealt with burnout. I had been working way too much, and I just needed some time to rest. And now that I'm back to work, I've been not really taking it easy. Wait, hold up. Let me explain. I know that sounds like a huge red flag, but hear me out. I have been focusing on following a more balanced schedule and work routine with more breaks that I do actually take. I have always been super guilty, especially when using the Pomodoro method of being like, well, I'm supposed to take a 5-minute break between these 2 work cycles, but what if I don't? That's changed. That's not gonna happen ever again. I've been really good. And another thing that's helped is also a paradigm shift. Oh man. Let's talk about synergy next. A paradigm shift, a shift in my mentality. Taking my breaks as a part of something that I have to do has been helping. I've been getting a lot of stuff done as well. I've been recording, doing super duper secret projects, and of course, finally working on my novels again, which is the most important thing and makes me so happy. Aside from all this, writing, projects, balancing real life, and a bunch of other things in between, what else have I been doing? Well, I figured that this is a great chance to actually promote a couple of things that I've been, or rather one thing, because I was looking at the things that I consume every day, and I love audiobooks, and I'm still working through like 2 different audiobooks, actually 3. Oh my god, I forgot I'm still halfway through that other book. Audiobooks are a little bit harder for me to listen in the mornings, except when I'm on my walks. In the mornings when I wake up before I put on my makeup and other intrusive thoughts. I like to listen to podcasts, maybe just like you are right now. And I wanted to just take a second to actually, oh my god, phone, please. I was looking through my podcast and I'm like, well, I can't recommend this one and this one because it's just like too random and it's just things that I've been listening to forever. One of my lovely friends recommended me a podcast, and I know it sounds weird that I'm telling you to go listen to another podcast while listening to a podcast right now, but I've been kind of addicted to this podcast. Is one of those things that feels like it fills a particular niche in my mornings, and a lovely friend of mine recommended me Let's Go to Court by Kristen Pitts and Brandy Egan, and this is a fantastic podcast. It is two lovely ladies talking about court cases and criminal files. And the day my friend introduced me to this podcast, like, I instantly subbed. And over the course of the next couple of days, I listened to like 5 episodes, and they're like an hour and a half each. I really like it because Kristen and Brandy are clearly, they have been friends for like decades. The tone of the podcast is just super conversational. It feels like that moment where you're at a social gathering and people start trading stories of like, oh my god, have you heard this and that? It feels like that moment when everybody breaks out their favorite ghost story, except instead of it being about ghosts, it's actually about court cases. And while sometimes being reminded of how unfair the court system can be, it is also very interesting. They do their research, and I really enjoy it. And it's a sort of thing where, like, I find myself recommending things when I realize... How many times have I used the word realize in the last 2 seconds? When I realize that I binge listened to like a third of the podcast, and I'm like, I should probably tell people because I really liked it. When I don't like things, it takes me forever to get through them, which makes me realize that maybe I'm not really enjoying that one really, really long 40-hour audiobook. But I figured, you know what? I love these ladies. Their podcast is super fun, super casual. They do break out dumb jokes, which I appreciate, in between the really serious conversation about court cases in America. And from the point of view of a writer, I guess I could, just slide under the door that it can serve as nice fodder for story ideas, or just realizations of like, oh, so you can't get away with that, or that's not a good way to dispose of a body. Thoughts that you have every once in a while when you happen to be a writer. The next item on my list of conversational subjects regarding my week is actually, apparently, what I wrote earlier, is a rant on how Evernote's new icon sucks. But you know what? I'll just give you the gist of it. Evernote changed its icon. It's not good. I changed it on my computer because aesthetics are very important, and that's an ugly icon. Highly saturated green in front of white with no shadow, no outline, no nothing. I'll pass. Thank you. And so forget that point. I'm not going to bore you with 3.5 minutes of that. Instead, I'm going to slide under the door that my lovely spouse and I have started watching season 2 of My Hero Academia. I keep highly praising that show. And if you want to know where we stand on season 2 so far, we watched 5 episodes in one sitting, so that's all I have to say about that. I promised a short week, so there is that. We're gonna move over to the questions, but before that, let me just tell you a little bit about the sponsors for this show. Omakase is sponsored by you, the lovely people pledging to my Patreon page over at patreon.com/mkaren make this show possible. And I just wanted to take a second to give a big shout out to some of my biggest patrons and biggest supporters. First off, we have Atilak. Atilak has a DeviantArt page over at deviantart.com/AHTILAK. Atilak. I also want to say a big thank you to A. Howard, Elisa Dudley, Amelia, Angela, Brenda, Caitlin, Gilbert Gaudreau, Irina Phoenix, Joe, Lacey, Mark Maruska, Nicola, Pat Eichson, Polly Craftool, Rain Misoa, Soul Muse, and Synexia. Thank you guys. And now, for viewer questions. I generally don't call out people by name in the questions, unless they're friends that I know, or people who have been following me forever and I know they are fine if I just call them out. Today's question comes from a good friend of mine, Dash Fox, also known as Dash. Dash wanted to know. He has been asking some of my friends and on the Discord, he wants to know, from my point of view, how do I tackle naming people, especially locations and organizations? How do you tackle that? And I can assure you, Dash, you're not the only one dealing with naming paralysis. Oh my god, I just came up with a name for that. Naming paralysis. One of my super duper dear friends. Wait, I've named her before. Oh no, I shouldn't name her. That just feels like I'm just making fun of her now. One of my lovely friends, she knows who she is, has a hard time naming characters. To the extent that it's become a little bit of a recurring joke, especially when I give her feedback. But that's fine. Names are important to a character, and to a location, and to an organization. I think they are. I don't think they're as important as we sometimes feel they are. I talked about this on my workshop of From Story Idea to Finished Novel, where I go over the entire process of actually getting a book out, and I talked about how it isn't until revision is finalizing that you actually have to commit to a character name or location. This is after you have written the first draft. This is after you have gone through the entire revision process, sent it out to your beta readers, and gotten their feedback. There is a long checklist. It doesn't help to be settled into something when you send, the book out for feedback, because you definitely want to get feedback on the names. But there are many stops along the way. So if you're suffering from naming paralysis right at the brainstorming stage, you know what? It's okay. You have a lot of chances to come up with a name. And in my experience, because to me, it's the same thing that I deal with when it comes to story titles. Story titles, character names, same scenario. I either A, have the character name or title of the story in my mind from the beginning of the brainstorming process, or I don't have it at all until the end of the story. And it's not until during the revision process that finally a title comes up, or a character's name is finally defined. Now, I've talked in the past about the perils of looking up names with meanings that are relevant to your character's story and the development of the plot. I have been making fun of for years now about the idea of naming the person who is going to betray the main character, Kane. That particular bit is very old, and it isn't particularly clever. I've never been a fan of names that actually mean something for the development of the story, mostly because if you know what the name means, if you're familiar with it, then you have already kind of been spoiled. It's not really like being in on the joke, because it's not really a joke. It's not like, oh, this character's gonna betray someone else. It never feels fulfilling, because you don't get the enjoyment of the surprise. Now, I don't think that's what Dash is asking about. I think that Dash is asking a much more broad question. Where do you find names? When it comes to character names, that's like the easiest one to answer, because that's just baby name sites. There's countless of them. There are ones that can help you sort things by definition, by background. I actually prefer the ones that are based on by background. If one of my characters is from this nationality, I would like them to have a name from that nationality or from a particular background. I find that to be a little bit more effective. I just try to be careful when it comes to, having names that are a little bit too on the nose. An additional piece of advice when it comes to naming characters is to also get in the mindset of the people naming them. You don't so much have to come up with your character's name as much as you could imagine, well, what would their parents have named them? Like, just thinking about that already makes the concept of the character way more complex, because you didn't give them a name that you thought was cool or it fit their story. You thought, well, what would their parents have named them, and why? As to finding the perfect name for your character, I want to just run through my usual little bits of advice. Stay away from names that mean something that is meaningful to the story. Make sure that if you have a lot of characters, that their names don't begin with the same syllable/letters, and that if they do, that their names have a different structure, different syllable count. I once read a story where all the antagonists had names that started with L and with A, and all of them had like 3 syllables. It was actually kind of silly. And by the way, none of them were related. There were 3 completely unrelated people, and they all had the same, like, name, basically. It was really confusing, to say the least. The other thing is that you don't have to come up with the last name for your character if the last name doesn't come up in the story. This is a sort of thing where someone might argue against that point, and I getcha. From my point of view, if the last name never comes up in the story, then you don't have to actually come up with the last name for your character. A first name is just fine. When it comes to locations and organizations, I tackle those 2 very differently. Organizations, since those are bodies that are being named by people in the world, I like to A, think of what they would name something, and B, I actually completely overlook the meaning clause in that particular scenario. Because if people are naming the big secret organization, then they're probably gonna name it something that sounds cool. Like, for instance, a quick example right off the top of my head, if you were to be writing a story about a secret organization attempting to revive the old gods, they might call themselves Reincarnation, or something like that. Like, again, I think, like, the clause of the meaning part, that you can overlook that when it comes to characters naming their own organizations, because it has to make sense for the tone. If you're writing a dark story about a secret organization bringing the old gods back to life, you can't call it something like Jimmy Joe and the Boys. You know, that sounds more like a rock band than it sounds a secret organization. There's also something to be said about using names that are unassuming if you're indeed writing about a secret organization, but these are things that ultimately, what matters the most is to get from the point of view of the people making the organization and what it means. Because, like an organization, you know, they have their ideals, their goals, their mission statements, synergy, paradigm shifts, many other big term words. You have to get inside of their headset. In the story that I'm writing, there is an organization that is trying to bring a new way into the law system of the land, reignite the law, and make the world a safer place, and they call themselves the Lighthouse Foundation because they believe themselves to be a lighthouse, fending off the darkness, standing in front of the tides, and preventing a change that would destroy the foundations of the world. So they call themselves the Lighthouse Foundation, and that makes sense. And there's more extra making sense meaning in there, particularly how the setting works, but I'm not going to touch on that. Get in the mindset of the people with making the organization. You know, what would the adventuring party name themselves? What would this group of people name themselves, and why? Is there a history? Are they naming themselves after a historical figure, a location, a place, an event? It's usually about getting in the mindset. When it comes to naming locations, unless the locations that we're going to are locations of a different background that use a completely different language, I prefer to keep the names of locations kind of in plain English. One of the things that I've never liked about fantasy is how you have elven characters speaking in English, pronouncing elven city names in Elvish, which doesn't make sense because they're clearly talking in Elvish to one another. So really, they should just pronounce the city in what that word or term means in plain English. not to bring up Lord of the Rings, but that's why they refer to that elven city as Rivendell, because whatever that elvish word is, it means Rivendell. So I've always kind of liked that approach of just literally spelling out what it is. I don't want to make it sound like I'm some sort of um, master of linguistics, but one of the things that you notice when you learn various languages is that the names of locations are usually just geographical descriptions. Hill Valley, Black Mountain, Death Valley. They're just descriptors for what a particular location is like, because that's how it worked back then. It's part of the reason why I like just geographical descriptions, because just knowing the name gives you a mental image of what that place looks like. Like, instead of giving you the fancy dwarven word for that location over there, I could just tell you it's called Black Mountain, and just telling you that makes you picture something more than just a word. I would also warn you to be careful when using... you should double Google what the name of your town is, even if you think you have a pretty good grasp on what you're coming up with and you think it's very original. I may or may not have once read someone's writing in class who thought they were being really clever when they came up with a name for an elven city in a fantasy story, and they wanted it to be all about light, because, there were the light elves, sunlight, all of that fantasy stuff, and they thought to use the naming particle berg, because that sounds like a city name, and it's French for a market city. So they thought, okay, well, something that means light plus berg, and they thought, well, Lux is a word for light, so they meshed them together and got Luxembourg, or Luxburg, and I kind of had to point out that that's the name of a real place. So it's a sort of thing where it's like, what? I came up with that, it's mine. And I'm like, no. I know, even when you have the best of intentions, you should probably double check what you're saying. Also, I've gone super long on this, but I want to just slide this under the door before I forget. Calling your elven city Luxembourg or Luxembourg is not inherently a bad thing. The thing that bothers me the most as an editor is that Borg or Berg is a French word, and it's of French origin. And why are your elves using French words or words of French origin? That makes no sense. As your editor, I would just put so much highlighter over that, and there will be so many margin notes. So keep that in mind. At the end of it all, I want to remind you that placeholder names are okay. You can carry placeholder names, you can just drop something in there, and just focus on continuing the writing. This may not be the easiest scenario, especially for Dash, who I believe works with comics, so you can't just start working on the comic without having a name, set in stone. Sometimes, honestly, what helps is just to look at my cast and see, okay, well, I have a name that starts with A, I have a name that starts with B, I have a name that starts with M. I don't have any names that start with L. Can I find a good name that starts with L? And you can do stuff like that. That just helps because it's the visual language of the novel, and when you have characters with the same letter that begins their name or the same starting syllable, it becomes kind of blurred. So I like to do stuff like that. And sometimes, honestly, you just grab a random name and it sticks. And that's okay. So keep it simple, and at the end of it all, don't beat yourself too hard over things. You can change the name, and at the end of it all, a name is not everything, and as long as you're not naming your main character, I don't know, Ebony, Darkness, Dementia, Raven, Way, I think you're fine, honestly. And now, for something completely different, I got a question from longtime viewer, watcher, and friend William. William wanted my thoughts and advice when it comes to reaching out to beta readers. What are my do's and don'ts, especially for someone who is doing this for the very first time? Now, I am delighted to talk about this, because I think it's a very important subject, and it also serves as another great, because I know what you're thinking, Max, Every week you give us a technical question and an inspirational question. This one doesn't sound very, very inspirational to me. It is. Because welcome to another episode of writing advice that sounds just like life advice. Dealing with betas is a lot about communication. And communication is important to all relationships. When it comes to reaching out to someone, you have to keep in mind that they're doing you a favor. They are helping you, and they're going to dedicate a lot of time, sometimes a lot of time, to reading your story. That is why, from my point of view, unless you really need the feedback / inspiration or motivation right now, I would not bother sending a first draft to someone to read. Mostly because, again, it's a lot of time, and it's not going to be as good as it can possibly be. Your beta readers are only going to read your story for the first time once. You only get to make one first impression. That is why I make sure to revise the story, to make it as concise, as clear, as well written as I can before I send it out to them. I want to get the best first impression. I want them to focus on the story, the characters, the beat, and what happens, not so much typos, faulty flow, punctuation errors. I don't want any of that. I don't want them to lose focus over things that I could have easily fixed. And I make sure to always fix. There are things that slip through the cracks always because I'm a human being, and I can't catch all of the little mistakes that I make, not even after a lot of passes. But I make sure to always send out the best version of my project. You may be thinking, Max, how do I keep myself from panicking the instant I hand them the manuscript? Because, someone is finally going to read your work and it's not you. I can tell you right now, with all of the honesty in the world, that shock and fear does not go away. I've told the story forever, but every time I print out manuscripts to hand out to betas, it doesn't hit me. It doesn't hit me. I'm confident about it. I've spent so much time editing. I've done so many passes. I've done everything that I usually do. I'm confident with the story. I've reached out to people. We have allocated time to talk about it over coffee and all that stuff. And I'm at the printing center. I'm at Staples. And the pages are coming out of the machine, and I'm realizing, oh no, someone's gonna read this. Oh no. Actually read it? Wait, hold on. Can I roll it back? And it's about 30 seconds of panic, but it wears off. Because I've already printed the manuscripts. I've already spent the money. I already said I was gonna send it to my friends. I've done the best I could, because you can always do more. But I did the best that I could. It's printed, it's out. I'm gonna send it to them, and that's what's gonna happen. I'm not gonna throw all that money in the trash, because it costs a lot to print manuscripts, and I'm not gonna waste their time anymore. So I send it out to them, and they read it, and that's the way that it goes. Every time I think to myself, this is the best story that I've ever written, and as soon as it's out off to the printers, I'm like, oh no, what if it's not? But that's life, and it's what we do. And at the end of it, your book will not take its best ultimate form unless you send it out to someone else to read, unless you get someone else's point of view. Now, as to when it comes to dealing with beta readers, communication. I want to inspire you to have notes in 3 pivotal points in your story. Have on your manuscript or on the digital file or whenever you send it to somebody, before the story begins, have a page or a couple. I recommend being brief. A page going over a couple of points. I recommend you first and foremost thanking them for doing this for you, giving them a timeline, work with them to see what works for their schedule, give them a quick summary of what the story is about so they know what they're going in for, unless you want them to go in completely blind, which I do sometimes, but that's because I trust them and they know me and they know what I do. But if this is the first time and this is their first time doing beta feedback, you should most definitely give them a quick summary of what to expect. If there's any particular sensitive subject, you should let them know, and then you should give them the big points that you want them to look out for. Because, as I've mentioned before, during revision, it helps the most to come in with a goal. And if you just hand someone a manuscript and just go read it, you are wasting a little bit. You're wasting a lot of potential. If you just tell them, hey, my biggest concern with the story is this one thing, they will keep an eye out for that. And they will give you the best feedback when it comes to that particular element. If you're worried about the climax of the story, tell them. If you're worried about whether the characters' motivations are relatable or understandable, tell them. If you're worried that the antagonist becomes a little bit of a caricature near the end, tell them. Tell them. A really bad beta note is something like, is the story good? Because I'm like, well, of course it's good. You wrote it, you edited it, you put a lot of work in there. Surely it's not terrible. You've put work into it. There's craft in here. Don't waste their time by asking something like, did you like it? Help them focus their feedback into a particular point. And I don't like to give them a bunch of things. I just like to just give them one or two things. And I know what you're thinking, but Max, I don't know what to focus on. Pick one thing. Just pick one. Consider all the things in the book that you think can become landmines for problems, and pick the one that you think is the biggest deal. And have all that information on the first page. So when they read the manuscript, this is the first thing they know about the story and the first thing that they're going to be carrying in their mind as they read the story. That's one thing. The second thing is this is what I like to do, you don't have to do it, but at the end of the first chapter-ish, generally when the free preview on any website would end, I have a page asking questions of what they thought of the opening of the story. You know, if you were to read this as the sample on like Amazon or Kindle or Nook, and if you were to read this sample, would you want to read more? So again, I have questions and comments at the beginning, after the first chapter, and at the end. When they have finished reading the story, please, for the love of all things holy and sacred, give them questions to answer. Not like a 20-question questionnaire, but like at least a handful of them of what you actually want to know. And here you can actually ask the big things. You can actually just zoom in and ask the specific questions. Did you like the antagonist? What did you think of this moment in the story? Did this moment hit you emotionally? Did you think the world made sense? Does the magic system work? Did you have any questions about the magic world? Is there something that doesn't make sense? On chapter 5, was it very clear that that was a flashback, not something that was happening at the same time as the story? Stuff like that. The big questions, like, because I know that if this is your first time doing beta feedback, it can be very hard to look at your story and ask anything other than, is it good? Or, as one of my friends would say, does it not suck? Which the answer is no, it doesn't suck. And I understand it can be really daunting to look at your story as more than just an overarching thing, but you have to slow down. Take a deep breath and look for the parts of your story that could be landmines, parts of your story in which the reader can get lost or confused. And even after a lot of editing, we're always self-conscious of our writing, so I don't think I have to preach on, be self-conscious of your writing, because we all are by default. But consider the weakest part of your story and ask them about it. Because what are we doing this for? To make the story better. If you're reaching for beta feedback for affirmation, you're kind of doing yourself and the beta readers of the service, because there's way more to this than just affirmation. And you will get affirmation, because if you're putting in the work and you're asking the questions and you're dedicating yourself to it, your story is not going to be trash. There will be little things here that didn't quite make sense. There will probably be a mistake here and there. But your story will be good because you put the work in, because you ask the questions, because you put in the time and you never shortchanged the reader. It's part of the process. It's part of how we tackle things. It's the hard work that no one ever talks about. But when you're reading a story and all the pieces fall together, you don't notice it. You become engrossed in the story and you enjoy it. I know that deep down, we all want to sit down with our beta readers at a coffee shop and have them say, "Oh my god, I love the story. It's absolutely perfect. There's nothing wrong with it." Deep down, we all want to hear that. But it's come to the point now where I don't want to hear that. I want to know what they thought about the story. I want to know if I made any mistakes. I want to know if I screwed up anywhere. I want to know if there's somewhere where I can improve. The story might be good now, but I want it to be more than good. I want it to be great. One of the notes that I always have at the end of the revision questions, or the beta questions, there's one question that I always have. If you could change one thing about the story, what would it be? That question is not always as fruitful as I would like, but it always gives you an insight. It forces the beta to look at the entire story as one thing and see, well, if I had to change one thing, I would change this thing. It makes them nitpick. It makes them pick one thing. And while sometimes it may not be something meaningful, it may not be something that you're actually going to change, it's good to see where people land. And one thing, because I know that I've been going a little bit long here, one thing I want to just say before I close this. Don't go into beta feedback expecting your beta readers... How do I say this? Because most of the time, especially if you don't have a circle of friends around you, there's a high chance that you end up reaching out to people who don't write books, people who are not aware of the craft, people who don't know what makes a story effective and what doesn't. And I'm not saying their advice is useless, because it's not. It's actually helpful to get advice from someone who reads a lot, and that will give you a much more kind of user-based point of view, and that's a good thing. Just keep in mind that if you're reaching out to people who are not familiar with the genre you're writing, or don't read books at all regularly, you're kind of... the feedback they might give you might not be the most useful feedback. But even if it's not, you thank them for their time, you read over their notes, and you see what you can make out of it. You see what you can do, and you make the best out of it. At the end of the day, what are we doing this for? Why are you doing all of this work? To make the story the best it can be. Sometimes you have to dig through feedback to find something that really improves the story. And other times they just hand you gems. Things you didn't realize. Potential plot holes. Inconsistencies. Sometimes you think that you really nailed that final speech, and then you realize that it didn't hit home like you wanted it to. And that's okay. They're not all going to be home runs. But the great thing is that you don't have to do a home run live on TV. I don't know if you heard my cat in the background. You're not a surgeon. You don't have to get it right on the spot. You have revision to make it great. And then you get to send it out to people. You have the power to make sure your words, your sentences, your story flows deliciously and sounds amazing. I make this joke all the time that if I had the power to edit what I say, I would sound so sophisticated, I would sound so smart, but then you just kind of have me making dumb jokes. And yes, I do edit parts of this video, but it's mostly just to cut out whenever I just ramble or trail off, or whenever my cat meows while I'm talking and interrupts me. Yanto. Yanto baby, are you scratching at the door right now? Alright, the cat has been let into the room. There's a trash truck like 2 blocks away. So get ready for a lot of background noise. Hey guys, I hope, William, I hope that my answers helped, and I hope that if anything I gave you another point of view. Before, I don't know, my neighbors outside start firing guns to make even more background noise, or, actually no, my across the street neighbor is not, I think he's on vacation. He's the guy who like 4 episodes ago, just like took out a chainsaw and just started doing like tree work while I was recording, and I'm just sitting there like, are you turning on a chainsaw right now? It's 9 in the morning on a Wednesday. Anyhow, I have rambled a lot. Here I thought this episode's gonna be short, but then I'm looking at the time and apparently it's going real long. Let's go into the final segment of the day. Yanto! What? What is it? Yanto, don't tell me you want to get out of the room. My son, Yanto, he's a Russian blue. He's a gray cat. He's scratching at the door because he wants to go out. Oh my god. I can't believe this. Okay. Huh? Is that so, Yanto? I'm gonna let him out. I'll be right back. Oh my god, this cat. Oh my god. Oh my god, he's so cute. I love him, but my god, he's so silly sometimes. Anyhow, hi. Welcome back to Omakase, featuring my cat Yanto. So, every week, I give you a creative writing prompt, some sort of exercise to help you think creatively. And today, I have an interesting story concept, and I want to know what you would do. The setup for this prompt segment is pretty usual. I'm going to give you an idea, I'm going to work through the questions that I would ask in my head, make some nice long pauses to give you a chance to think what you would do. And if you do end up making something, whether it is a cool image, doing some writing, making a game or something, creating background noises as I'm talking, let me know. Oh my god. Today has been a comedy of background noise. That's a trash truck. They're coming for me. So I'll be right back. Alright, so I explained to the truck driver that I'm not getting on this one, I'm getting on the 12 o'clock one, so he let me go. I'm like, please let me finish the podcast and then I'll go back, okay? Fine, alright. So, it's because I'm trash. See, that's the joke. The joke is that oh my god, is my cat meowing in the background? Today's episode's just been utter chaos. Okay. Back to the show. So the prompt. If you make something, let me know, because I might want to read it. I might want to retweet it or reblog it on Tumblr or whatevs. It's fine. If you make something, let me know. Today, we have a story concept that arrives from looking at a particular genre and asking, how can we make this more interesting or less lame? There is, and I'm going to go through this real quickly because just even thinking about it makes my eyes want to roll out of the back of my skull. There is a genre of Japanese fiction known as isekai. Isekai literally translates to another world. These are stories in which an everyday, normal-looking doofus gets transported to another world where he usually happens to become way too powerful and earns the adoration of women, earns fame and respect, and it's just a good old power fantasy. So that's boring. Let's make that way more interesting in a prompt that I'm calling protagonist syndrome. Because these fantasies, of like, oh, what if I wasn't a loser in the real world and instead I was in a fantasy world or some sort of other dimension where I was suddenly cooler and everybody wanted to be my friend and all the women wanted me. What if instead of something like that? What if situations like these were different? What if instead of a power fantasy, we had a moment of conflict, a story beset with crisis? What if instead of going to a world and earning everything, going from a nobody to a somebody, what if instead of that? What if instead of perks, you got burdens? What if you don't arrive at heaven, you arrive at hell? Now, we're not yet at the prompt. I'm going to give you a scenario, something that I came up with. It's simply the act of looking at something and thinking, how can we make this more exciting? How can we make it a little ironic and a little tragic? Because part of that genre is the escape, the idea of not being in the world that you're in right now. The world in which you're kind of a loser. What if you were instead somewhere where you could be a hero without doing any of the work? And I thought, like I always do, I look at something and I think to myself, well, wouldn't it be awful? Wouldn't it be terrible if there was a story like this? Where you wake up one day and you find yourself in a different world. And finally, you're the protagonist. You're finally at last at the center of a story that finally understands how great you are. But you are not the protagonist. What if, imagine a character waking up. There's background noise. I hate it, but I have to record the podcast. I apologize. Imagine a character waking up one day without realizing how, but they wake up in a different world. And they're surrounded by people. People who admire them. People who love them. People who respect them. People who fear them. Our character finds themselves in a new world where they happen to be at the head of some sort of evil, horrible, cruel organization. You don't get to wake up in a new world and now, yes, you are now the sovereign of our wonderful, beautiful, magical kingdom. No. You are the vessel for the dark god. You are the head of the super mega corporation now. You're in charge of the empire. You are at the head of this league of space pirates. And now you're in charge. And people expect you to do certain things. And in the back of my head, the original example that I thought about when I was thinking about this, I thought of the mastermind. I thought of someone running some sort of, not an amazing scam, but an amazing in scale horrible event. I don't want to say a terrorist because I feel like that's a little bit too harsh, but I was thinking of like the mastermind behind some sort of incoming world crisis. Like just imagine one day you wake up and you're somewhere else entirely and everybody's looking at you like, all right, you're the leader of our terrorist organization. What do we do next, boss? And I like that because a part of me likes the idea of a character waking up one day, waking up somewhere else entirely, looking around and they see their tens of thousands of followers. And the crowds look to them, demanding blood. What do you do? What do you do? This is fantasy, right? If I wasn't who I am right now, I could be so much more. But I love the twist. I love the twist of ending up in a different world. And guess what? You are worse off now. Because now either A, you pretend that you are who they say you are, and attempt your best to play your role, or you go against the flow and endanger your own survival. I remember coming up with this. It's the sort of thing where I think about a genre and I'm like, that's so boring and tired. How would you make it more fun? And I just came up with a mastermind scenario, You wake up and the rest of your followers are like, okay, we're ready to release this mega virus into the entire continent. Please, Commander, press the button. What is it like? What is that like? That's the question, isn't it? That's always the question when it comes to character stories. What is it like to be the poor sucker in this spot? And to me, I find that immediately much more interesting and exciting than the power fantasy, Than getting to do whatever you want and being popular with all the girls. That's so endlessly boring to me, because there's no character strife there. There is no moment of inserting yourself and wondering, oh man, what would I do in this situation? What would you do? What would your characters do? Consider this a great chance to do a what-if scenario. Take your protagonist and just dump him. Just dump him right there in the middle of that scenario. Everybody looks up at you, and they say you're the reincarnation of the old gods. What do you do? What do you do? And I do realize that I never do make the formal prompt. I kind of just do like an implied prompt. But here's a formal prompt for everyone. Write a story about a normal person, or seemingly normal person, who suddenly one day wakes up in a different world. Our character wakes up in the role of a leader of some sort of powerful organization set in destroying the status quo. Whether it is a virus meant to kill 90% of the population, summoning the dark gods, bringing an end to sunlight, or through the power of a mega corporation, bring the economical world to its knees and shatter, by means of dark magic or money or wealth or power, armies, demons, hell, and gunpowder. Through whatever means necessary, shatter the pillars of humanity and civilization so that you can attempt to rebuild them anew. Hey there, Max here. Thank you for listening to the 12th episode of Omakase. I hope that the prompt was fun. I know that I went more on my own tangent, and I didn't want it to be very rambly, but at the end of the day, the idea is not so much this genre sucks, but it's more of the look at the things around you, question them, analyze them, and seek to make them more fun. The idea of someone biting off more than they can chew is one of my favorite story beats. Oh my god, I could just write dozens of novels about that. In a way, I kind of have. But it's fun. That sort of character strife to me is endlessly way more interesting than fantasies. Not the fantasy genre, but you got what I'm saying. Hey, I hope this podcast helped, and I hoped that if anything, I served as nice company during your bus ride, your commute, while you're walking your dog, washing dishes, or preparing yourself to write. If you enjoy the show, leave a rating leave a review. It would mean the world to me. And of course, support me on Patreon. All of my patrons pledging $1. All you gotta do is pledge $1. You get these podcasts a week before they go live on YouTube and iTunes and everywhere else. And you also get a shout out. In the shout out section of the show, I give a shout out to every single one of my patrons. So if you don't want to enjoy the end of if you don't want to be part of the end of the video club, feel free to tune out now. For everyone else, welcome to the end of the video club, where we stay until the end of the video and where I stop editing. As part of the kind of fun little mind games that we play with each other, I actually don't do any editing, so that you get to see and listen to me be silly, and you get to hear the awful jokes that I would sometimes just cut out. Hi there. Welcome to the end of the video club, where we stay until the end of the video. I would like to give a big shout out to all of my patrons. A Howard, Atlak, Alistair Baywood, Alisa Dudley, Amanda Stevens, Amelia. I forgot to say that if you were to buy me a cup of coffee over on my coffee link, ko-fi.com/mkaren, I will also give you a shout out. I did that last week, and it's just a thing that I do. I'm recording the podcast so soon back to back that I actually haven't gotten any new coffees donated. So, there's that. Amelia, Amy Palmer, Angela, Annie Hoshi, Biting the Sun, Blarg, Brenda, C.E. Richards, Caitlin, and the other Caitlin, Cannibal Lily, Carrie at Eccleston. Man, one of the Caitlins could totally throw me off. Like, if one of you changed your name to have a lowercase c, then it would be like capital C Aitlin and lowercase c Aitlin. That wasn't funny, was it? That wasn't funny. Okay. Cannibal Lily, Carrie at Eccleston, Kathy Lindsay, Christiane, Christine Dennis, Kristen Lofton, Citro, Clem Pastor, Carissa Glasheen, Dwayne Jackson, Eleanor! Oh my god, I forgot Erasos changed their name to be in all caps. Erasos! That sounded more like me shaking my fist at the evil scientist getting away. Erasos! Joffrey, Gilbert Goudreau, Heather Tasker, Irina Phoenix, Janosch Hebatsky, Jaytana Kirkwood, Jeffrey James Williams, Joe, Juan Nunes, K.M. Anderson. I did it again. K.M. Anderson. K.M. Anderson. Kameshwar Rao Shaluri. Or Calorie. I'm never gonna get that name right. That's never gonna happen. Kaylee! Kiel. Kid Lee. Lazy! Lear Killo. M.T. Locatelli. Mark Maruska. Mary Foster Smith. Nicola. Nicole Grissom. Nicolay. Noam Sohar. I don't know why I have this faint memory of just saying Noam Sohar in my sleep. I like that name. I like Noam Sohar. That's a good name. Is it a real name? You know what? This end screen has been very clean. There hasn't been any stupid jokes. So you know what? Don't mind me bonking the mic. Noam name. What does Noam mean? Okay, so Noam is a real name. Oh, it's a Hebrew name meaning pleasantness. Ah. This is where the name Naomi comes from. Oh my god. Oh my god, that makes so much sense. Here's some famous people named Noam. Oh, I learned something today. Alright. Man, I should start tagging this podcast under educational. That's dumb. That's really dumb. Where was I? I just Noam Sohar. Okay, there you go. Hey Noam, I didn't mean to broadcast what your name means. Man, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great? The first time you tag along until the end of the video. Additional to that, welcome every week. Welcome back to Russian Name Roulette. Where I give you Russian names? No, that wasn't funny. Where every week I may just grab one of your names and just do a 2-minute piece on it. Talking about that, novels and tomes. Pablo, that wasn't funny. That wasn't funny. You know, sometimes you make a joke and you think to yourself, man, I'm so clever. I'm just so clever. And then, like, I can already see Max in post being like, how am I gonna cut this so that it makes sense? The answer is, I won't, because I don't make edits during this part of the video. Pat Eichson. Did I say Pablo? Pablo! Pat Eichson. Polly Craftool. Rain Misawa. Raquel Fernandez. Resonance Andy. Roa. Shimmer Tales. Sky D. White. Soul Muse. Sylvia Leitilla. I lost my space in there. I was thinking about, like, oh man, you know, sometimes I'm like, well, there's been no saney in this, you know, reading of Patron names, so I went in real hard on Noam Sahar. And now I'm like, is that enough saney? Is that enough silliness? And I think it is, but I completely lost my spot. You know, I'm doing that thing where I'm in auto mode and I'm like, my mouth is just saying the names, and in the back of my head I'm doing that sitcom thing, you know, where like I'm looking to one corner and like there's like a little thought bubble and I can hear my own thoughts but they're echoed, and I'm like, you know, just at the effect, and I'm like, man, was that funny? That wasn't funny, was it? No, that wasn't funny. And then meanwhile I'm just like, Soul Muse, Sylvia Leitilla, Synexia. Welcome back to what's it like inside of my head. It's not that bad. I think so. I mean, I have no other point of reference, so who knows? Thomas Baker, and last but by no means least, the lovely Wendy Christopher. Also, you may be wondering, Max, why is Wendy Christopher, who has a last name that starts with a C, at the very end? Well, because Patreon sorts you by whatever your name is. So Wendy is a W, and Wendy is the last letter. Wendy's the last letter of the alphabet. Okay, it's time for Max to go home. Hey guys, how y'all doing? You're all very lovely people. Thank you for putting up with what may be one of the worst end screens ever. You're all lovely people. And now, a couple of words. Life is all about balance. Cookies have both sugar and salt in them, because without the salt we can't recognize the sweetness, or it becomes overwhelming. That's not to say that life should be about bad things and good things happening, but it means that we should cherish the good things. We may not have full control over what happens to us, but we do have control over how we react to things. I do know that sometimes a part of me becomes enticed with the idea of being really bitter and holding grudges, but I try my best not to do that. Why? Because you get to carry that stuff with you forever. And sometimes that burden can completely stop a person. This is not coming out of particularly anywhere. I'm not projecting or anything. It's just a thought that I had in the back of my mind, and since you're all tagging along, I'm sure I can just at least impart a little bit of knowledge. Don't carry those things. Cherish the good in life. If you have a moment to listen to this podcast, you can take a moment to just take a deep breath, drink some water, get up, stretch, take a break, just a 5-minute break. If you can spare it, take it. Take care of yourself. It takes care of the writing. And until the next time we meet again, take care, writerly friend.